You're listening to the Institute of Commissioning and Assurance, where commissioning isn't a phase, it's project leadership. Unlock the systems-based approach that is reshaping delivery of today's most complex infrastructure projects, from energy systems to industrial processes to transport systems, plus much more. Say no to project failure and say yes to value creation, accountability, and successful project outcomes. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. Today, I'm super excited to welcome David Tain to the Institute of Commissioning and Assurance. David is a project leader in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and he's working in the oil and gas industry, and he specializes in operational readiness. He's an expert in building programs that ensure teams, system assets, and processes are all fully prepared and aligned for operational success at the end of projects. And today, David is going to show us all the steps required to prepare your projects for operational readiness success. Welcome to the show, David. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. For this great opportunity and for the Institute of Commission and Assurance. And by the way, an amazing, I read actually over the operational readiness standard that was issued yesterday, and very well needed document in this, especially in this particular area in this industry. I want to thank all of you guys for coming all along this morning to join us and get some appreciation for the importance of the operational readiness in the commissioning and startup industry. Again, without more preamble, let's just start rock and rolling. So why do we need operational readiness? Well, the most immediate cause is very evident, right? So operational readiness, trying to commission and start up a project with an insufficient understanding of the readiness is definitely a lead cause of accident. Another situation that we know were detrimental to the asset. And why is that? The reason is very simple. As soon as we start moving from scope-based to a system-based, so all these system components are going to start working together in a way that if we did not anticipate their behavior, they're going to become failure modes, right? So that's essentially, what's going to put us in improvisation, in rework, and unnecessary costs and unnecessary stress in the project that if had this been anticipated in an operational readiness program, would be prepared for that. Especially when we enter in the production phase, you can see here that trying to control production profile is going to be extremely difficult because we're trying to rework and try to troubleshoot situations that we did not anticipate. Of course, as a result, we're going to experience some erratic production profiles that are going to be super difficult to control. And of course, as I mentioned at the previous point, potentially we can end in a really failed situation. Any complexity, any person that has been in commissioning understands that complexities emerge really rapid, and we don't know, and literally we need to be prepared and not necessarily improvising if we're not ready if you don't understand the behavior of the system. I came across a few years ago with a study, all the information. This study actually got my attention, and it was conducted by Deloitte. And they mentioned that about 30% of the value of a capital program is destroyed due to deficiency in operational readiness. The interesting portion of that study is that when you actually look at why all this happened, it's not necessarily the technical aspect that causes this failure. It's the human aspect. It's the interfaces. It's the communication and the integration, right? So that's essentially the lead cause of the failure in operational readiness. So what is the objective of the operational readiness? So operational readiness is a critical process in the project life cycle that prepares the asset owners to receive the facilities under execution. Of course, that means that we ensure a robust and seamless transition for an efficient ramp up and operation of the asset, right? So making sure that it's safe, profitable, and sustainable. And of course, that all occurs as we identify timely all the residual risk that could impact the startup and the operation. We want to encapsulate all these in one statement. I'm very reductionist. I try to always to simplify and make simple all these concepts. We can say that the operational readiness is the last integrated line of defense prior to asset startup. Now, I know one of the key things that I always appreciated along all this, when I have conducted professional readiness programs, is that we have professionals from different areas. So we have construction, engineering, operations professionals. And one of the things that I take my time is just to harmonize perspective, no knowledge. We all have our knowledge in our areas. We're experts in our areas, but different perspective. And that doesn't mean that we're wrong. So in order to harmonize perspective, let's just, readiness normally from the operational point of view is defined as the level of functional completeness in an asset plus the management of the residual risks. So what do we mean with functional completeness? It means answering the question, is the scope that has been completed good enough to safely start up the asset and support initial operation? Not only to push the button, but also needs to be sustainable. And that comes as a function of the review, an exhaustive review of the relevant areas or relevant tasks in a project, or system, procedures, interfaces. Each project is going to be unique and is going to have their unique requirements. When we talk about residual risks, essentially we're talking about what is the impact of the remaining scope or any remaining activity into the startup and ramp up in the operations. Can we actually sustain operations with that? And not only that, what is the timing? If we have something open, what is the timing to address the remaining items? And I always use the analogy of a car here. So let's suppose that we ordered a custom-made car, and I just go to the dealer the day that he promised me to deliver the car, I say, well, you know what, David, I do have your car, but right now I don't have the spare tire that's going to come in 1 month. It is my particular situation what is going to define whether I take the car or not. Because if I have a float of 10 cars in my garage, probably going to say the guy, no, I can wait. But if I need a car to Uber and bring food to my family, probably going to have to start entertaining management my residual risks, right? So I'm going to absorb the risk, or I'm just going to rent a tire or whatever. The same thing happening in organizations. So the strategic significance of a project will actually dictate what is the level of tolerance that I'm going to have, and what is the management of this residual risk that I'm going to have. That the strategic significance of that project can mean the sustainability of the organization, right? So, and it's not going to be the same as if I had just another train that I'm going to produce, and I have plenty of cash flow in my organization. Going into the same area to harmonize knowledge, one of the things also that I also mentioned is the difference between readiness and completeness, right? So, and I put here 5 key differentiators in terms of frame, control, goal, the nature, and the span. When we talk about readiness, we're talking about the frame is the operating asset plus the business, which is no more than the organization, the system, and the technology, right? So completeness itself is the actual scope, the completion of the scope. We control readiness with the actual processes. Where the completenesses, we control them with project particular deliverables, so schedule, logs, execution plan, etc. The objective of the readiness is the startup and the sustainability of operations, where the completeness is the project completion. That actually leads us to think that readiness in nature is a continuous variable, because readiness calibrates the owner's tolerance, the risk tolerance. So essentially, are we ready to operate given the level of completeness that we have in our project? Completeness is just discrete because it's tied to hard contractual milestones. Are we done or we're not done? And of course, when we talk about lifespan, readiness is reached until the stable operations is reached. And it's interesting because once you actually hand over the asset to operations in terms of readiness, you make sure that it's stable. And that is actually the interface with the operational excellence efforts in the organization when you optimize. But you want to make sure that you deliver an asset that not only works, but also can sustain until the actual operations organization can take it over. We all have seen this chart in project, which is as we advance the progress, we have more knowledge, and of course the risk identification decreases, right? Along the progress line, we're going to have a point where we're going to call functional completeness, which is essentially what we discussed in the 2 slides ago. This functional completeness means that I can push a button, the system starts going to work, everything I can energize. Notice that I didn't mention the word safely here. So the system is going to work. Each owner is going to have a minimum readiness acceptable, a minimum level of readiness acceptable. And that's going to depend on the particular situation of the organization, and that's going to dictate the robustness of the residual risk, the mitigation of the residual risks. As we can see here, the longer or the closer this minimum readiness acceptable to the owner is to the project completion, the larger the window of the risk aversion is. Eventually, we would like to end with an operational readiness evaluation, an exhaustive evaluation of all the items that we're going to see in subsequent slides, and end with a point where the senior leadership said, yes, we authorize to start up to operate. And of course, we have full knowledge of all the residual risks that we're facing ahead of us. With this now, let's enter into the process. And to define the operational readiness process, these two key components. We're going to talk about the hierarchization, and we're going to talk about the life cycle. Starting with the hierarchization, we can actually divide this one in 4 key levels, right? So we start with the domains, which is what are the business entities that are part of the relevant to the project, to this particular project based on the nature and the characteristics of the project. What are the functional areas? So what areas within the domain need to be considered and evaluated in the projects, right? So I do have field operations. I do have now, let's say, work authorizations or maintenance. I'm going to have now functional requirements as a subsequent level, which is the actual specific question that I'm going to ask to demonstrate readiness, right? And the deliverables, of course, evidently, what is a tangible product that I'm going to use to produce assurance of that deliverable, so of that functional requirement. In terms of a life cycle, we have proposed a model what is a 3-stage model, very simple model, but this can become as long as bad, but essentially it can be reduced into 3 key stages, right? So we call the APR, and start with awareness, preparedness, and readiness. First stage, awareness, is no more than defining the readiness, right? So what is exactly the front-end identification of the parameter, what any risk tolerance, what is the value-driven tolerance based on the organization, and the external contributors, right? So we're going to see more details in subsequent slides. And also, besides defining readiness, we are going to also set the rules of the game. Essentially, who's doing what is the level of engagement of the organization in this readiness effort, giving us the window or the gate to go to engage the actual preparedness with all the information is captured and occurs. The next level is preparedness, is where we actually orchestrate the resource and obtain the information. This is where the data is produced, and we integrate the analysis, and we produce dynamic reporting and proactive mitigation in the actual process. And notice that I use the word orchestrating here and not coordination or integration, because along the project life cycle, information is going to be produced in different stages, different maturities, and moreover, there's going to be level of availability of information. As any project, there's going to be situations where we're going to have to take a decision with incomplete information, right? So that's the reason why we use the word orchestration. Any person, any entity in charge of the operational readiness effort needs to be 100% well versed in that level of production and synchronize this information in order to feed the entire view of the operational readiness and understand how this affecting the big scheme into the readiness of the asset. Finally, the readiness portion is the decision-making point, right? So it's where we actually demonstrate the operability and sustainability of the potential of the asset. It's where we do all our verification and we produce a confidence deliverable. And notice that this is a process. This is not prescriptive of what deliverable is. Each corporation is going to have their own particular strategy to demonstrate readiness, but has to be something tangible that generates confidence to senior leadership, that provides the overall picture of the asset to push a button and start introducing energy. Going to the awareness, the first stage, the foundations. Essentially, what we do in this stage is just we identify the OR requirements, right? So what we saw in the hierarchization, we identify the relevant domains, the functional areas, the deliverables. What are the criticalities of each of these deliverables to the project? We start calibrating the risk tolerances upfront with the asset owners and the operations entity. And what are the external factors influencing the project? And this is also when we actually move from scope-based to system-based. I can have the most ready from the technical perspective facility, but if I'm depending of diluent to be brought by rail and I don't have in place all my contracts, it doesn't matter how ready I am, the feedstock is not going to allow me to at least to sustain operations in a way that is reliable to the organization, right? So that's really, really important. That is, this actually expands to anything that influences the project, internal, external. Of course, in this first stage, we set up the OR program. And again, we do the applicable elements. What are the evaluation criteria based on the criticalities? What is going to be the monitoring and control strategy? How are we going to centralize and integrate the data? That's really important because now with all these cybersecurity issues, I mean, operational readiness is going to be capitalizing and managing a lot of confidential information. The reason why all the owners need to be really, really careful in how the data gets managed, centralized, and what are the solution, right? So that is used to that. That's going to dictate what is going to be the infrastructure and the IT solution. There's a myriad of softwares in the market, but one of the key things that I always try to bring attention is that you got to be really careful with how this is confidential data that is pertaining to the organization and needs to be well managed. So that's one of the key things in the program setup. And of course, all this needs to be integrated with the corporate risk management. Ideally, ultimately, the idea is just to produce an operational readiness plan that aligns at the minimum all these items that we actually have described here. In the next stage, preparedness, right? So it's no more than the analysis and the integration of information. This is where all the data gets synchronized, analyzed, and integrated into the overall operational readiness program. So, and notice also that I emphasize here in the dynamic monitoring is because of the difference in time and different availability of this information that gets produced. So we need to understand the data availability. What is the progressive engagement? What is the stakeholder performance in producing this data? Stakeholder performance is one of the key items in operational readiness because it's actually is the source of the data. What is the correlation with external constraint and how we synchronize and calibrate the information? Of course, all this is going to be the input to identify and categorize the risks that are going to be ahead of us when we start pushing button, commissioning, and handing over portion or the entire scope to operation. Ultimately, we're going to define how we're going to transition to operation, and we eventually would like to assemble any decision document, any decision package that creates the confidence in senior leadership to make sure that we can not only start up but also sustain operations until stable the plant or the facility is stable. Finally, we have the readiness, which is the readiness stage is the decision. And this is where we actually see the overall health of the asset under execution. We see the integrated state of the domains and functional requirements. We understand very well the residual risk and the external threat, and we integrate all these with the business. Very important here is that any outstanding actions needs to be broken down and the closure times and who's doing what. And that's where items start falling through the cracks because we don't know when we transition, and a lot of projects don't actually take that into consideration. It's just log the action, and they don't really take into consideration who's going to do what, and what timing, and how detrimental that can be when we try to start up or sustain operations, right? So essentially, we need to understand if it's going to be by project, by commissioning, by operational organization, or by the entity that the organization decides. And of course, ultimately, we're going to end with a formal authorization to start up and operating the asset. Now, how do we eat all this? So in order to all this concept, this is a visual representation of how all these concepts play together. This is a fictitious project built in real experience and real projects. And you can see here how we have defined in the APR process, what is a domain, what is a functional area, and functional requirement. We can see here on the left side that we have a domain is a field operations. We have functional areas like training and competency, work authorization, operational procedure, and so on. And functional requirement, which is essentially the question. We can see here that in the work authorization, we do have, do we have in place a permit to work program to operate the facility? in the operational procedures, do we have for a particular system the startup, the shutdown, or the switch procedure for this system, right? So are we actually ready for that? So once we actually define this upfront and we start engaging or in the preparedness phase, we should end with something like this, right? So as I say, this is just a visual representation. You can see here in the particular the field operations, we have a couple of abnormalities, right? So we have a yellow in the work authorization, and we're going to see how actually that looks like in the lowest possible level of granularity. And we have a red in the asset management strategy, which is particularly spare parts. That's my tire of my car that I couldn't get, right? So it's I need to be able to decide based on my particular conditions whether I can operate without a spares or not. If we go to the lowest possible level of granularity, you can see here in the functional area work authorization, right, which is categorized as high. So this project decided to ask, is there any integrated Lotto system in place, lockout tagout? So this particular project decided that they're going to implement an electronic tool, but at the time of the review, the electronic tool is 75% developed, right? So the Mr. John Doe responded that the Lotto system is currently working on a manual basis in a brownfield facility, right? So the electronic tool to monitor is not yet fully implemented, which is leading me to these OR indicators, right? So the organization decided that this solution is going to come from the central team, the IT team, and project is not going to complete it, but the outstanding action after startup is going to be to fully deploy the electronic tool that integrates with the residual risk, with the risk management process in the organization, and is identified as a Lotto manual integration is jeopardizing concurrent work because it's actually manual paperwork into a brownfield facility. And you can see here that there is a specific risk attached to the risk registering organization. The risk, we put the risk ORPM 004. You can see here that eventually we are going to end with a holistic view of the operational readiness program that is going to allow us to produce this confidence package, confident deliverable, going through all the domains, the functional areas, requirements, and everything that we saw in the previous slides. And that is going to give us a good perspective in what are the recommendations, what are the overall readiness assessments of the asset, right? So from bottoms up, as we saw, what are the findings? Do we actually have a showstopper? What are the actions that we have, and who's going to do it, right? So the residual risk, not only how we identify them, but also when we transition to operation, is that properly captured and integrated into the risk management process in the organization? And what is the transition plan to the organization, the operational organization, right? So and so on. Essentially, this deliverable must be in place in order for the organization to confidently press buttons and start introducing commodities and declare that we are ready to commission, start up, and start operating the asset. So with that, we can see key takeaways. As you say, all these words are visual representation, and I always make a lot of emphasis in this particular slide. So this is not a digital package, digital software. So you're going to see here in the market a lot of digital solutions, which are amazing. And with this, I'm pro digital solution, but the right size, the right tool to the right project. So operational readiness is going to dictate what tool to use, not the other way around, right? So operational readiness is an expertise-based decision-making methodology that is scalable to any project requirement, right? So you're going to use the tool that is suitable for you as long as you have a robust process that sustains that the readiness for your assets. Operational readiness ensures the safe transition of the asset to the operating organization because it orchestrates the functions and activities, right? So you are pretty much engaging the right resource in a timely manner as the project approaches the operations phase. Of course, one of the key and the most important attributes to the process is that you identify and control the residual risks, right, as they emerge. It's always better to define, address issues before the plant is alive and before we start seeing the behavior of the systems, right? So we need to anticipate that behavior because, as I mentioned at the beginning, if we don't understand the behavior of the system, they're going to become failure modes. Operational readiness sets the profitability path potential of the assets because essentially it allows us to go with the end in mind. It steers the project life cycle and the deliverable at the function of the end goal, which is an asset in a safe, sustainable, and profitable operation. And all this, of course, saves and avoids costs because we clearly define the requirements and accountability, proactively integrating all this process within execution. Reason why upfront I define operational readiness is a critical process within the project life cycle. It's always cheaper to identify and address issues on time and avoid any scope creep. And with this, we can conclude that the operational readiness enhances project delivery and improves decision making for a safe, sustainable, and reliable operations. With that, again, I want to thank you guys for coming today and listening to this. And I hope all this material has enhanced your appreciation and contributed to your knowledge about operational readiness. Thank you, Paul, again for the great opportunity, amazing from the Institute of Commission and Assurance. And with this, I turn over to you.
Thanks, David. That was excellent. David has given us a gold mine of information in this presentation. So appreciate for everyone watching. Now we've got some time for some questions, and I see that there's tons and lots of interest in the chat here. So we'll go through each one of the questions. If you have additional questions, by all means, shoot them in the chat. This is your chance to get expert answers and advice from an expert like David Tain in operational readiness. So as we go through the questions, please shoot them into the chat and we'll go through each one of them here. All right. So yes, lots of questions on, is the presentation available? Can we get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. Yeah, the presentation is recorded, so it's streamed on LinkedIn and YouTube. You can get the recording there. Watch it anytime. Please share it with other people on your project because this is valuable information and we need everybody working on projects to be able to understand this critical aspect of completing projects. I don't know if you have anything else to add on that one, David.
No, it's essentially, one of the key things is that what I've observed along all this my career in projects and operational readiness is that it is a lot of the importance of that and making sure the transition from the scope base to a system base is critical. Is critical. I mean, you can see here, and we all that have been involved in commissioning have seen, as we mentioned even before we actually were starting the presentation, how rewarding it is to see all these pieces of this thing working together. But at the same time, we have had what been, unfortunately, we have witnessed when things go wrong. And when things go wrong in this transition, they really go wrong super fast and super bad. I mean, we're talking about commodities, we're talking about system with energy, internal energy. We're talking about systems we don't understand behaviors, and a multi-billion-dollar asset held by a small spare part that cannot be found only until 6 months brought from Europe right to America, right? So this is the kind of things that operational readiness need to ensure. And not only the most fatal thing is the accident, but also it can put you in troubles, particularly if your project has a strategic significance to your organization, right? So I've seen that tons of times. One project particularly actually had to shut down for 6 months. That I was actually one of the, it's interesting, the smallest yet the most complex project that I ever worked on. It also, as the Deloitte, reinforcing the Deloitte study, it was because of the human factors, right? So it was a lot of interfaces, and it was literally shut down for 6 months, and the team had to be brought back. A different team with different knowledge, ramp up curve, and every time that we talk about that, we talk about money and money and more money bleeding for the organization.
I really liked your point during the presentation where you said the underlying process is fundamental, right? Software is a tool and software can certainly help us, but if you don't have a solid foundational process, then you can't use software to scale a broken process. That's only going to amplify the problems. Is your underlying process for commissioning and operational readiness is fundamental, and then you can use software to help you scale a process that's world-class.
Well, absolutely, Paul. And in that line, I mean, just a final comment on that. Yes, that's especially nowadays with all these cybersecurity issues, we have seen that happen in the market, right? So operational readiness manages a lot of confidential information. So any tool that you decide, it needs to be robust enough. I've seen tools, I mean, we have cases in the market that tools have been shut down and the clients have been leaving hanging. I have a couple of examples of that. I mean, of course, for confidentiality reason, I'm not going to mention that. But yes, there have been tools that have been shut down, and they have left the clients in a really difficult situation with a lot of confidential information in a cloud or whatever. So it's because these particular clients decided that the operational readiness is going to be conducted by a IT solution or OR solution itself, as opposed to a process, and therefore, they ended in big trouble. So that's a big word of caution that I use. I'm Pro Tools. I know amazing completion management tools that work very well, but you need to right size your tool to your project, right? So, and make the checks, check very well the robustness and the security of your tools.
Very valid point for sure. Yeah. So if anybody's got questions, now's your chance. Shoot them in the chat. We'll get them answered. Dr. Basil Ali's got an interesting comment here saying that the important thing is toolbox to understanding the planning activities for the project every day, going into a deep understanding of the project at all team levels in the project must be understanding all details to participate in problem solving. So I take that to mean it's not just an end of project to try and figure this stuff out and make it fit together. 100% of the project team's got to be contributing to this effort, right, David?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what another key argument that we made here, another key statement that we made, is that operational readiness is a critical process within the project lifecycle. It has to be integrated in the project. It is part of the project, right? So, trying to just to understand how the components of a system work at the very end, and only just understanding how the scope work in my particular silo, is one of the most dangerous things that can happen. And not only that, if you don't understand that, if for some reason you need to optimize your execution, or let's say that you need to bring cash faster to the organization, and you have 3, 4 trains, and you better start up with only one train, you better understand very well how the system work together. How do you isolate the system? How do you isolate that train and the key components to start bringing cash, bringing value to the organization as soon as possible? In the meantime, that concurrently you complete and finish the readiness for the other trains, and you declare readiness on an overall scale. So that understanding that only operational readiness program can give you that. I mean, execution is focusing execution. Completeness is versus readiness. So yes, we are all project professionals. We're here. This is my task. But readiness is going to be the glue that amalgamates all these components and allows you to understand this transition.
That's a good point. So this question is related to, I think, the graph you had that showed risk and progress and the two intersecting lines. So the question is, what is the time frame difference in both of these?
That's going to be, when you think the time difference is between when you declare readiness, that's going to be dependent on as I mentioned at the beginning, on the specific attributes of the project, right? So you're going to reach a point where you have a level of functional completeness, which essentially, and again, notice that I didn't say safe. I say functional completeness. You're going to push a button, everything is going to start working together. Operational readiness is going to tell you is it safe that you push a button and you actually, let's going back to the car, right? So you can actually, you can start the car, but you don't have the actual wheel. So you can drive the car in different ways, but is that safe to do it, right? So it depends on the attributes and the needs and the requirements of the client and the owner operator to determine that timing. And you can see here in that graph that, I mean, of course, that is an indicator of the risk aversion of the client, right? So the closer that time frame is to the project completion, the biggest the risk aversion is, or can be also an indicator of the redundancy. As I said, I do have all the facilities that I'm bringing me cash. I have a healthy balance sheet in my organization. So yeah, I have the luxury to wait. Why not? And I have all my stuff. My corporation is in a healthy journey, so I can wait. So that's going to be dependent. So that's the reason why you have a time frame, but each project is going to define their particular time frame.
This next question is an excellent one because we see this often on projects so earlier in your presentation, how much percentage of these functional chains actually gets broken down when the situation is a weak financial situation or with non-structured management. We see that often on projects where it's maybe not as structured as it needs to be at the front of projects. But so in that situation, what do you do, or how do you break that down?
Well, I mean, I would say it's hard to say, but I would actually say the front end preparation is key on this, right? So when you actually start breaking down, in terms of weak financial and non-structured management, eh, the key attribute of an operational readiness is the human factor, right? So I mean, when we don't have that clear, when we don't have a strong structures that supports these OR processes, and when the organization that take it serious, let's put it that way, right? So when the organization is only execution based, schedule driven projects, right? So that actually can put you in troubles, right? So it is hard to pinpoint a percentage of the modes of failure, but it is really, as you mentioned, we see 30% of the value destroyed based on the failures in operational readiness failures. But at the end of the day, anything, you're opening a Pandora box, right? As soon as you don't understand the systems, right? So putting the financial, I mean, the sky is the limit, because you essentially, the lack of understanding is what is going to dictate your failure modes.
Excellent point. Here's another good question. Have you experienced cases in which the insurance company values the operational readiness process and actually reduces premiums?
Well, indirectly, yes. Not, I mean, I have never seen an insurance company asking directly with this operational readiness. And there's a reason why. Operational readiness is a concept that, although it's not novel, has always been underappreciated and always embedded into different sub processes in the organization, right? So it is now that the industry is taking this traction. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is amazing that the ICA developed and issued this first standard. Is well needed, because operational readiness has existed in different modes. I mean, in reviews and different reviews, audits, but has never been in an integrated way. I think with this movement and this traction that we're taking in the operational readiness function, insurance company are gonna definitely. I wouldn't be surprised that insurance companies are going to be looking at that in the same way that they actually looking at reviews, right? So to reduce premiums, and that makes a lot of sense, because the premiums are a function of a risk that you have. The more mitigated risk, that the less risk, or the more control you have the risk, insurance companies are going to look at that as the more confident they have, and subsequently, I would expect that the premiums are going to be reduced. But no, we know the straight answer is no. I have never seen a insurance company, but I invite that to do that, right? So looking at the operational readiness to reduce the premiums.
That's definitely closing the loop, right? When often the money drives the decisions, right? But if you close the loop on that and you're getting a reduction in insurance premiums because you're instituting robust operational processes, it only makes sense that the owner benefits and values from that, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Should an organization start from developing an OR strategy and operational readiness guidelines before rolling out OR on its projects, or OR principles can be rolled out on a project without a corporate OR strategy?
Well, that's a really good question, right? So, I mean, the operational readiness needs to be existing from the project inception, right? So that means that the organization needs to have in place operational readiness processes, standards, and practices, right? So I would expect that a major corporation, energy corporation, or production corporation, at least have an appreciation of how to start deploying and developing an operational readiness program into their projects. So yes, to answer your question, operational readiness is a process that needs to be embedded into the organization and is critical part of the project lifecycle, meaning that you need to start deploying OR even at the development of the project, right? So because that's when you start seeing your processes. That's when you start developing your PFD, your PNADs, all your HACCPs, right? So all the operational readiness process is going to progressively start being fed with all this information. And the earlier you deploy that, the more effective and the more protected you're going to be as an organization to transition to operations. So I think, yes, to answer your question, they should have an OR at a corporate level. I mean, at least a minimum level of standardization of OR, and then you start deploying, right? So depending on the project, as early as you can, as early as development stage.
Hi, Mike. Good to see you. Mike's one of our experts in our certification program for commissioning. Mike wants to say hi. David, you are truly an expert in this field, and I really enjoyed working with you on previous projects and seeing you hone your skills and putting them to good use.
Oh, thank you. No, it was a real pleasure working with Mike, and thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Have you experienced conflict with EPC and EPCMs? Typically, they love constructions by tons of structures and run away from assuming responsibilities which are inherent for commissioning an OR. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, Paulo, yes, absolutely. And not indirectly in the operational readiness, but that actually comes in the interfaces, right? So I have been in projects where you don't put this in the contractual terms, especially when you have mega projects, right? So multi-billion-dollar projects. If you don't anticipate that into the contractual relationship you're going to have multiple contracts, you're going to start being hit with change orders, right? So I'm not supposed to manage this. I'm not supposed to report on that. Or, I mean, I'm here just to, especially when you have very highly specialized vendors, right? So they have proprietary information. If you don't actually set up the rules of the game up front in the program, you are going to really face a lot of interfaces issues. And that interface is going to be with the integration of the operational readiness program. Operational readiness, it relies a lot in the integration. And if you don't have a good grasp on that, yes. So the EPC, EPCMs, and moreover, vendors, specialized vendors. I mean, EPC and APCM, yes, I have experienced that, but it's manageable. It is when you actually go to very specific vendors that either are managed through EPCMs, depending on the model, or B, you actually manage it yourselves, trying to obtain information. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this information is going to be produced at different stages and different level of availability. You're going to have to take decisions with incomplete information or with not up to date information, or even moreover. So you're going to have to update information on the fly and understand how this impacts the overall operational readiness scheme, right? So a piece of information, we actually have a project where it was we install a sulfur ox, a trade technology from Shell package, and when we actually, based on some information that we have with the reservoir, and when we actually start drilling just for final test, we found that the mercaptan levels were too high, and the entire sulfur package was pretty much thrown to the garbage. So it was a big not miss, I would say. It's a big updating information. So then we actually had to rapidly deploy a mercaptan capture package and so on. So you can see here that yes, you can, if you don't anticipate, if you are not onto the game in the operational readiness, you can actually run into troubles, especially when you manage specialized information, specialized vendors, and EPCM. So everything, the devil is not in the details, the devil is in the interfaces, actually.
That's a good point. Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure exactly what this question is asking, but let's give it a try. What is your client within the end user organization?
The organization itself, right? So the organization itself has to be full control of the operational readiness process, right? So the clients are owner operators, right? So now a specialized organization in operational readiness, I mean, with the expertise of the operational readiness, are the ones that we provide the knowledge, but the clients are the owner operators, right? I don't know if that answers the question, Paulo. I mean, it's
Possibly, yeah. Paulo, if you have a
yeah.
follow-up question, definitely shoot it in the chat and we'll get you an answer. So Thomas has a question, somewhat related to the mining industry, but his experience is that the a lot of this operational readiness has been often left to operations at the end of the project. So have you had a similar experience or examples of best practices, how it's not all left to operations at the end of the project?
Yeah, I mean, not with this particular the Amira Metal accounting code. So I'm not with that particular, but here actually we're working in mining projects in the oil sands mining, and one of the key things that upfront we define this is one of the key requirements. The Amira Metal accounting code is it would be one of the key requirements to define it upfront, right? So when we actually go in the awareness stage. Any project that requires that requirements needs to be upfront, and of course the SMEs and the right entities in the organization responsible for producing that, it needs to be defined. And at the end, if the decision is being left to operation, well, we better define that at the beginning, because then I need to, as I mentioned at the one of the first statement in the key objective of the operational readiness is to actively prepare the asset operations, the asset operator to the sustain and operating of the assets. So if there's something that the operational organization that the organization decided that the operations entity is going to do, we better define it upfront to give them the resources to prepare them to receive and properly operate and act on any code, on any information that they need to produce.
Hi, Roberto. Good to see you. His question is, how do you propose to include this in the project process? Would this be through a consulting engagement, or would this be an in-house team that would be responsible for execution of OR? Or does this methodology just really need a sensible approach with the project owner? How would you approach this?
Well, that depends on the capability of the organization, right? So, I mean, trying that, this is the reason I'm hesitant to produce a silver bullet solution, right? So, I suppose this is a process that actually is going to dictate based on, so you're going to have a process, and this process is going to actually expose what are the capabilities of the organization. Probably if your organization is mature enough, you probably have an operational readiness team in the organization. If it's not, you're going to have the need to bring consultants or bring experts in operational readiness, which actually are going to subsequently expose items that you are lacking of. So let's say that you have an organization that is a small producer and you're pretty much producing maybe 30, 40,000 barrels a day facility, right? So you have good growth, but then all of a sudden you you have a partnership with another bigger, and now you are designing a 100,000 barrels per day facility, right? So and you are going to be the operator. So well, you don't have the capability to do that, right? So you bring the operational readiness process, and this in within this OR expertise, you're going to highlight that, well, you know what, I need trainers. I actually need, panel operators. I need to bring this particular vendor. Now my accounting system needs to grow, going back to the actual metal code that the previous question went, right? So maybe now the volumes that I'm producing are larger. I need to upsize the organization just to attack this, right? So yes, it's going to depend on the capabilities of the organization, their particular situation, and the strategic significance of your project, right? So but definitely needs to be deployed upfront, no matter the capabilities, no matter the size of your organization. Operational readiness is something that needs to be deployed upfront. You need to define the parameters to avoid any surprises.
And this question is somewhat related. How does the OR team integrate with the project team to ensure a vertical facility startup?
The OR team, how does the OR team integrate the project team? The OR, well, the operational readiness team, they actually working in, it has to be in integration, right? So I'm going to give you an example where as soon as you're building, let's do execution. So when you are in the engineering stage, and you are doing your HACCPs, your model reviews, you need to have somebody from operations there, right? So that's actually, so something that needs to. So you cannot just go engineering, go bring the construction experts, which actually you have to. How this is going to be? You also mentioned constructability reviews, but a few people bring the commissioning people early enough in the project, and some people say, well, because it's no, it's just you don't need an army of people. you need to start progressively deploying, right? So that's something that you need to define upfront, right? So your operational readiness effort needs to be integrated in the project at the very early stage, right? So that way, and it's going to give you input on how to even more efficiently start up and sustain operation even at the inception phase. That's even going to help you in optimizing your engineering and saving costs, right? So uh, normally what I've seen is that in successful projects you start deploying commissioning startup operation experts and operational readiness at the very beginning of the project. So when you are at the 30% model review, you have to have somebody there from operations. At the very early stages in development, you have to have somebody that has done something similar. Tell you know what, maybe this bypass doesn't work, or even at a functional level. You know what, we don't have the capabilities to do this, so we better start hiring more people for the supply chain, because we're gonna have now multiple contracts that I'm not capable to manage with these two people that I have in the organization, right? So that's how you actually do it.
We've all got lots of commissioning horror stories of how projects have gone wrong. Maybe you can share one for Bernard. He's asking, have you experienced cases where an industrial process facility fails to have a smooth startup, even after integrating OR within the project development?
Well, no, I mean that's actually the questions, right? So when you actually operate, when you integrate the cases that I've seen where you integrate OR and the organization take that serious robustly, uh, definitely I have seen smooth startups, right? So, and again, I can, for confidentiality reasons, I'm not going to mention particular projects, but that can go from, onshore to offshore projects, right? So when you actually when you actually review exhaustively all the aspects of the project, which is what the operational readiness process obligates you to do, an exhaustive review, you normally, anticipate, are there new situations that are going to present when the commissioning phase starts? Absolutely, absolutely. But now you, with the operational readiness process, you have the redundancy, right, to that. So a hose blew up, right? So, well, you actually anticipated that because you quantify your residual risks. On the converse side, and conversely, so I actually see cases where the industrial facility fails to have a smooth startup, and this one of the smallest project that I ever worked that I referred to. And yes, I mean, a lot of situations were not anticipated. The project was not calibrated with the actual plant shutdown. It was a brownfield project, and the end result was we couldn't start up. So the entire team was the operational readiness was non-existent there, and the entire team need to be demobilized, brought back, but now was with new people. So it was a really, and starting up that project was, yeah, it was one of the most interesting experiences of my career, to say the least, right? So I've never seen so many things. It's literally, it becomes a chain of events. It becomes a perfect storm when you actually do that. It's interesting how, and going back to how the systems are working together, how one thing, as soon as you start calibrating the complexities, you calibrate one variable and another one comes. Is the bottlenecks start moving around the system in ways that you cannot predict. You are open to anything. And eventually, the worst case scenario, you're open to an accident.
Interesting is a good way to put it. Yeah, of
Yeah,
long 18-hour days trying to make
yeah,
everything work at the end there, for sure.
absolutely.
So this next one, which one or maybe who is the control point for operational readiness in the org chart structure?
It has to be an independent, not independent, an operational readiness lead, or an operational readiness person, or an operational readiness entity in charge. That operational readiness should overarch between project and operations, right? So this is essentially the function that actually brings the project to life, which is actually, as we titled the presentation, right? So your function as an operational readiness expert, lead, or whatever you want to go as an operational readiness practitioner is to bring that asset to life. So it is a big responsibility because you need to overarch between the two organizations. You need to understand very well how the scope needs to be completed. What is the level of readiness that you have, the completeness you have, and you need to understand the requirement for operations. So it is you as an overarching entity between projects and operation that is going to bring this baby to life and hand it over to the parents.
It's not a subcontractor, a sub-activity, or just another group you bring on site for a few minutes. It is an overarching function to make this
Absolutely.
transition, for sure.
Yeah, and that's good. I don't want to see this as isolated function. It is embedded, but it's an overarching process that actually bridges between the project and operations.
How do you see equipment commissioning affecting operational readiness?
Big time, big time. I mean, operational readiness is going to be when you actually are doing in the preparedness phase, you are actually exhaustively reviewing the state of your equipment. Key items that I had experienced before, cleaning. So we're gonna do a chemical cleaning on a system. Are we gonna do just an air blow, right? So I've seen in this particular thing decisions that have been, well, we're gonna save money in a chemical cleaning. We're gonna do air blow. We pretty much seized a pump that needed to be the entire pump sent to to from Fort McMurray to Edmonton, and a big pump. So you know how long that takes, and it put your project are ready for operations date in jeopardy, right? So yes, equipment commissioning, you need that level of preparedness is what is going to put you in a good position to commission your asset and to make sure that you're ready. And not only that, a lot of cases you're going to have very highly specialized equipment, right? So you have a particular software in a DCS, then you need to troubleshoot with automation, right? So at least if you have that unknown, you need to be able to mitigate that risk. And if I have something that is super specialized, what is the redundancy I'm going to have in case that this unknown materialize? I think that's the key, right? So equipment commissioning, not only equipment, I mean software, readiness. I mean it can affect potentially, and is the role of operational readiness to determine and to define and what are the failure modes that could be experienced in that case.
So these next two questions are related to AI. I'll lump them together here. So Dr. Basil Ali says, we did an AI closed system for maintenance management system regarding the oil wells to evaluate the cost control and time during shutdown. And then the next question is, have you managed any AI tools in the OR phase, or do you have any tools AI related that you could suggest?
Jesus, that's an interesting question, right? So AI right now is taking a lot of traction. AI, the limitation of AI is that AI is the amalgamation of the knowledge that is available in the network, right? So this is one of the dangers of the AI, because AI can actually it can enhance in the front end always, but once you actually enter into the human factor, I don't think right now AI is in the level of maturity that you can actually automate commissioning operational readiness, right? So I'm pro tools, I'm pro technology, but only at the front end, because it's up to the expertise of the commissioning operational readiness practitioners. It's up to that's going to dictate what is your level of readiness, right? So I don't think AI is going to give you only the best possible combination of information that is out there. It is up to your particular project, your particular experts that are going to make you successful. So no, I cannot suggest you any tools. No.
And it's like any other tool, right? You need the right tool for the job, but you first need that underlying best process. You can't use a tool to scale a broken process. And at the rate of pace that AI is going, if we're going to scale the current broken processes, we're going to make an even bigger mess. We need to get the underlying commissioning and operational functions and processes embedded into organizations before we can leverage the power of AI.
Correct.
All right, last question, and then I think we can close right on time here at the top of the hour. Which issues can arise due to unclear command structures in operational readiness?
The same issues that any unclear command structure in any project. So that is exactly the same issues. So as I mentioned, OR is an overarching process. and it's more it's an integration of the information, right? So more than command, I would say more is an integration, right? So the failure modes don't come from the commanding structure. The failure modes come into the integration. So you can have the most robust commanding structure, but it's up to how this information, the information will never lie. So there's a saying that, if you torture the data enough, the nature will confess, and that's actually by a Nobel Prize in economics, Ronald Coase. And it's exactly that, right? So you can have the best command structures, the best robust structures, but is the robustness of the data, is the actual accuracy of the data that's going to dictate what exactly is going to, how it's going to look the operational readiness effort, and how you're going to sustain your operations.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Lots of great questions. I appreciate everyone's interest. David, if people want to reach out to you, or if they have additional questions, they want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to do that? Is the best place on LinkedIn to connect and
LinkedIn
reach
is the
out?
best place. We can start for more than happy. I mean, more than happy to answer and to be reach out, and I'm more than happy to continue discussing operational readiness. As I mentioned at the beginning, operational readiness is getting the traction that it deserves, and I can overemphasize. I'm so pleased to see that standard that the Commissioning Association, Assurance Association, delivered. Super pleased to see that, well needed, and this operational readiness it has the potential in the same commissioning to change the whole industry of how we execute projects, to make them, not only successful but also safe.
And I think that's the key point. Yeah, everybody working on projects, we all should be working towards the same goal, which is delivering a safe and high reliable project that can be used for decades of reliable operations. So definitely appreciate your insight and expertise on this, David. Appreciate the presentation, and appreciate everyone's involvement in great questions, and for joining the presentation live. And if you haven't already, please go download the operational readiness standard. Like David says, you can go to icxa.net. And there's a link there to access all of the standards, the outcome assurance standard, the commissioning standard, and the operational readiness standard. And that'll help you with your projects to set them up for success. You can share this replay with others. Definitely watch it again, share it with other colleagues, and share David's expertise with others so that we can spread the message and help everyone deliver successful projects. Any closing comments before we conclude, David?
Well, no more than thank you for the opportunity, Paul. And amazing, working with the ICXA. Great initiatives, and I want to thank everybody from joining for wherever they are in the world. Thank you so much for sparing the time, and I hope that we have contributed to your appreciation and knowledge in the operational readiness world, and the importance of that, and make sure that you consider and make sure that you encounter operational readiness as a key factor to your project success.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening. Are you ready to lead infrastructure projects with purpose and accountability? Join the movement at icxa.net and unlock exclusive resources, from global standards to project delivery reform and career development certification programs. Visit icxa.net for more information.